That winter was cold not only because of the snow, but because of the secrets buried beneath it, the kind of cold that seeps into bone and memory alike. Through the wind's mournful cry outside, a faint bell rang at Onlac Old Bookstore, the place where time had stood still for Madame Le for 2 long decades. It was a girl, a stranger. She carried no luggage, only a name. And when that name was spoken aloud, it wasn't just a sound. It was a lightning strike into the past, splitting open the frozen silence of 17 forgotten years. Madame Lee's eyes, long dried of tears, trembled as she looked at the girl. From that moment, the family tragedy she thought was over rose again. Fierce, unstoppable, merciless. Yet behind the pain, this story is also a promise. It is a journey to reclaim the truth, a final chance to mend the fractures that had become chasms within the heart, and to rekindle the fragile flame of love and faith, once thought lost forever. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family.
That afternoon, the wind swept through Willow Street like an old man's weary breath. The first snow of the season fell softly, each pure white flake melting on the glass, turning into trembling trails of water under the light. The street was so quiet. I could hear the wind slipping through the door cracks and the ticking of the clock on the wall, the only sound proving that time was still moving. I sat behind the counter, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. The last bit of warmth had vanished, leaving only the bitter taste lingering on my tongue. On the table lay my monthly expense ledger, the numbers written in red like blood. I stared at them for a long time before putting down the pen, my eyes tired. Could I make it through another winter? That question lingered like a ghost, returning every time the weather turned cold. My name is Harris Alexis Destiny, 62 years old, an old woman with graying hair, living with memories and books no one reads anymore. This store, Willow Street Books, was once the dream of two people, mine and Henry's. We opened it in the spring of 1987, believing the world would always need stories, and that love, once printed on paper, would never die. But then Henry left, taking with him half the soul of this store. Since then, this place has been only a hollow shell of memories, where people come not for joy, but for quiet. Ethan, my son, left 17 years ago. He said I was living in the past, that paper books would soon disappear. The last thing I said to him that day was, "Some things don't need to be updated to still have value." He turned away, carrying with him the silence of us both. Since then, every winter I've sat here, watching the snow fall through the window, wondering whether I'm holding on to memories or just afraid of being alone. That afternoon, as I was counting the last few coins in the drawer, the doorbell rang softly. A small sound, yet enough to make my heart skip. It had been so long since I'd heard that bell in the late afternoon. I looked up. A young girl stepped in, trembling like a leaf blown astray by the wind. An old coat, worn fabric, wet shoes, her dark brown hair stuck to her cheek, and her eyes, those eyes, were both determined and frightened. She closed the door, shivering slightly as the faint warmth from the heater surrounded her. "Hello, ma'am," she said softly, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Are you hiring by any chance?" I stared at her in silence. The question sounded strange. No one came looking for work in a place already half dead. But her eyes kept me from turning her away. I pointed toward the heater. Come warm yourself up first, child. It's too cold to talk about work. She nodded, her pale lips pressed together. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice hesitant, as if afraid of being refused. I don't need much, ma'am. Just a few hours a day. Cleaning, shelving books, anything really. Asked her name. Emily Parker, she replied. That name made the air in the room suddenly thicken. Parker. My throat went dry. Before I could say anything, she continued, as if to explain. My mother's name was Laura Parker. She used to live in Salem, but she passed away last year. The pen in my hand slipped and hit the floor with a sharp, cold click. I bent down to pick it up, steadying my breath. In my mind, the name Laura Parker rang like a bell from the past, a sound I had buried for 17 years. Laura Parker, the girl who once came looking for Ethan, the one who called me, crying in the night, saying he wouldn't be coming home again, the one I never met, yet regretted not listening to for the rest of my life. And now, her daughter was standing in front of me, 16 years old, thin, frail, and carrying Ethan's eyes. I looked at Emily for a long time. She avoided my gaze, fingers fidgeting with the torn edge of her glove. Outside, the wind grew stronger, making the window rattle slightly. In that moment, I heard Henry's voice echo in my memory. Some encounters, Harris, aren't coincidences. They're chances sent by God. I swallowed hard. You're hired, I said, my voice low but firm. Emily's eyes widened. But really? Yes. Help me organize the books, clean up. There aren't many customers, so the pay's small, but you can start tomorrow. A smile bloomed on her small face, hesitant but warm. That smile made the room a little brighter. Thank you, Ms. Harris, she said softly. The way she pronounced my name, gentle, respectful, tightened something in my chest. How long had it been since anyone said it that way? When Emily stepped out, the bell rang again, and the cold wind swept in, along with a few flakes of snow. I watched her figure fade into the white blur, then exhaled softly. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same. It felt like something was waiting. That evening, I sat in the corner reading, beside the chair Henry used to occupy. Steam rose from my teacup, the scent of licorice and ginger filling the air. I glanced at the empty chair, almost seeing him there, kind eyes behind his old glasses. Do you see her, Henry? I whispered. A strange girl, but her eyes, just like Ethan's once were. I suddenly remembered the first time Ethan helped me rearrange the shelves. He frowned because I insisted on keeping those old Robert Frost poetry books. No one reads them anymore, Mom, he'd said. And I'd smiled, replying, That's all right. Some books aren't meant to be read. They're meant to be remembered. That memory returned, vivid enough to hurt. Yes, Laura Parker. That name was tied to the greatest regret of my life. If I hadn't stayed silent that day, maybe Ethan wouldn't have left. If I had believed in the goodness of others sooner, maybe I wouldn't be sitting here now, in the middle of winter, in a store about to close. I leaned back, listening to the snow fall beyond the window. Inside me was a mix of fear and strange anticipation, as if fate had just reopened a door I'd long locked away. That girl, Emily Parker. She hadn't come here by chance. I could feel it, even if I didn't yet know why. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow was falling heavier, the streetlights fading like in a dream. I whispered, my voice rough and trembling like the wind. Today, I didn't hire an employee. I just hired a question that's haunted me for 17 years. The next morning, I heard strange noises in the house. At first, I thought it was a cat stepping on the tin roof, but the footsteps were too light, too careful to belong to a cat. When I went upstairs, Emily was standing there, holding a broom in both hands, her face so serious it was almost funny. "You're up early," I said, my voice still rough without coffee. She turned around, her eyes bright in the dim light from the window. "I thought I should tidy up a bit before the customers come." I chuckled softly. "Here, you'll have to wait until spring to see any customers, Emily." She only smiled and said nothing. I watched her for a moment, that small figure, with her messy brown hair and oversized sweater, somehow made the attic feel less lonely. I made coffee, poured an extra cup for her. When I set the warm mug down, Emily whispered a thank you, wrapping her hands around it as if she were holding the first warmth of the morning. I never thought having someone else sit with me at this little kitchen table could make the house smell like happiness. In the days that followed, the store began to change. Not in any big way, just little things. But I felt each one. In the morning, I'd hear her footsteps upstairs, then the sound of water running in the sink, books being placed neatly on shelves. She kept careful notes, book titles, locations, dates of arrival. She even left small handwritten notes for customers. "If you like silence, read this one. It's as lonely as you are." The words almost made me laugh, yet they warmed my heart. Somehow, the girl was breathing a bit of soul back into this place. One afternoon, I saw Emily rearranging the poetry shelf. I was about to remind her to sort them alphabetically, as usual. But then I froze. She was arranging the Robert Frost collections exactly the way Henry used to, leaving small gaps between each book, as if to let the poetry breathe. A lump rose in my throat, a feeling both tender and sharp. She worked carefully, her head tilted, brows furrowed slightly, the same way Ethan used to look when he didn't quite understand the first lines of a book. That little furrow. God, I thought I'd forgotten it. At night, after the shop closed, I would sit doing the accounts, while Emily wrote something in an old notebook. "What are you writing?" I asked. "A journal," she said. "I write down the good things that happen each day." I laughed softly. "You found good things here, in this dying bookstore." She looked up, her eyes sincere. "Of course, it's quiet here, warm, and someone gave me a chance." I turned away so she wouldn't see the sting in my eyes. Another morning, I dropped a stack of order forms. Papers flew everywhere. Emily rushed to help, smiling. "It's okay, Mrs. Harris." I froze. Mrs. Harris. The way she said it, not ma'am, like in the beginning, made my heart skip. She said it so naturally, without thought. But to me, it felt like a mark, a small one, yet it touched something that had long since gone dry. After that day, I began waking up earlier. I brewed an extra cup of coffee and placed it on the table. I listened for her footsteps on the old wooden floor, the soft scrape of the chair as she sat down. A house that had once known only sighs now had the sounds of two people. And somehow, I didn't feel so alone anymore. But beneath that warmth, fear still waited quietly. Every time I looked at Emily, fragments of memory pulled me back to my last argument with Ethan. It wasn't about money. It was about faith. He wanted to sell the store, turn it into a tech cafe, more modern and connected. I had shouted, my voice trembling, "You're throwing away what your father built with his whole life." And Ethan had only replied softly, "You're holding on to a grave, not a memory. Then he left, without turning back. Since then, I've hated technology. I've hated the blue glow of phones. Whenever I saw people bowing their heads to their screens, I wanted to scream that they were missing the real world. So when I saw Emily with her old phone, taking photos of books to remember their titles, I almost scolded her. But I didn't. I just watched in silence, realizing that she was doing what I had once refused, bridging two worlds, the past and the present. On weekend evenings, I cooked an extra bowl of chicken soup. At first, she refused, saying, "I've already eaten." But I always left it on the table anyway. And every time, when I returned, the bowl was empty. She ate quietly, but I could hear the faint clink of the spoon against the bowl, steady as a heartbeat. One day, while I was cleaning the back shelves, Marco, the cafe owner next door, stopped by, holding two pastries. "I've seen that girl reading by the window," he said. "She's too thin, so I brought some food." I smiled. Marco was always kind. He set the pastries down, then said softly, "You know, Harris, maybe that girl being here is good for both of you." I didn't answer, but inside, I knew he was right. One night, I went upstairs to find extra blankets for winter. In the corner, I found Emily's old backpack, worn, frayed, soaked with moisture. When I opened it, a musty smell rose up, mixed with the scent of old paper and stale bread. Inside were just a few clothes, a small photo of a blonde woman, likely her mother, and a little notebook tied with a ribbon. My hands trembled as I closed it. Her small, calloused fingers, the old cracks in her skin. Those weren't the hands of a child who'd been loved enough. Something inside my chest cracked softly and melted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to the wind brush against the window frame, thinking of Ethan. Perhaps my son, somewhere, was staring into the same emptiness I was now. And I wondered, what was fate trying to tell me? The next morning, when Emily came, down to the kitchen, I was writing out an order list. She greeted me with a small smile. I smiled back, then asked casually, "Have you ever wanted to know about your family, Emily?" She looked surprised. "My family? I only had my mom." I nodded, my voice light. "Would you like to do a little fun project sometime? Like tracing your family tree? I once read that knowing where you come from is one way of knowing who you are." She laughed, thinking I was joking. But that afternoon, when I walked into the pharmacy holding 2 DNA test kits, my heart was beating strangely fast. I went home, set the 2 small boxes on the table, and stared at them for a long time. Outside, snow had begun to fall. The yellow light from the lamp reflected off the glass, coating the room in a fragile warmth. Inside me, fear stirred, the fear that what was about to be revealed could change everything. But some questions, once they arrive at your door, cannot be ignored. I whispered to myself as the wind howled outside. Perhaps it's time to know the truth. That morning, the snow had melted, leaving thin trails of water on the eaves and a pale light streaming through the old window. The air inside the shop carried the scent of damp wood mixed with the aroma of the coffee Emily had just brewed. I had grown used to that smell, a blend of new life and old memories. It reminded me that I was still here, still alive. Emily moved quietly, gathering the stacks of old books in the corner. I thought about helping, but she said, "I can do it, Mrs. Harris." The way she called me Mrs. Harris now sounded so natural. I no longer corrected her. I just smiled and sat in Henry's old chair, listening to the rustle of paper, the familiar sound I once thought I'd never hear again. At noon, while rearranging the shelves in the back, I noticed the attic door slightly open. I climbed up, the weak light filtering through the small window. On the floor, beside a stack of boxes, I saw a gray fabric backpack, wet and streaked with mud, as if it had slept outside for many nights. I bent down and unzipped it. A musty, earthy smell rose up. Old fabric mixed with the faint scent of cheap soap. Inside were a few thin clothes, a small torn notebook, and a pair of gloves with holes in the fingers. At the bottom, I found a small photograph, faded and creased, showing a blonde woman smiling, holding a little girl. Both wore thick sweaters, and behind them hung a sign, Bus Stop Cafe. I knew instantly it was Laura Parker, and the little girl in her arms, Emily. I brushed my fingers across the photo, my hands trembling. The smell of the backpack lingered on my skin. Cold, street-worn, the scent of long nights without anyone to care. I pressed a hand against my chest, feeling my heartbeat quicken, as though someone had flung open a door to the past. I sat down, breathing deeply. Every sense of mine was filled with her image, the small, cracked hands, the hardened calluses from too much work, the fragile yet determined light in her smile. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part felt angry, at myself, for letting the world grow so cold that a child had to carry her whole life on her back. I closed the backpack, but the image stayed with me all afternoon. When Emily came down from the attic, wiping her hands on her worn apron, I quickly looked away. "Where did you live before coming here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, her eyes lowering. "Oh, a few places. Stayed here for a bit, there for a bit. Nothing important." Then she gave a small, awkward smile and continued cleaning the table. I knew she didn't want to say more, and I didn't press her. But from that moment, I silently promised myself I wouldn't let her be alone again. That afternoon, Marco stopped by, as he often did, carrying a few pastries. He set the box on the table and smiled. "You know, Harris, ever since that girl showed up, this place seems brighter." I shrugged. "Maybe so." "Not maybe," he said, glancing around. "I can see it. Before, walking in here felt like entering a museum. Now, it smells like life." I laughed softly, but warmth spread in my chest. Marco handed another small box to Emily. "Here, kid. I made an extra for you." Emily accepted it shyly, her eyes lighting up for a moment. That simple scene made my throat tighten. How long had it been since I'd seen someone do something kind without a reason? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table, staring at the 2 DNA test kits I had bought. I placed them in front of me, studying the boxes. On the cover, the words read, "Discover your family." I gave a faint laugh. Family. 2 simple words, yet perhaps the hardest thing in the world to find. I remembered Henry's voice. "Harris, sometimes you have to let the truth in, even if it hurts." I picked up a pen and wrote on a small note I stuck to the box. "Fun project. Tracing the Destiny family line." I knew I was lying, but I didn't have the courage to call it by its true name. The next day, I left the 2 kits on the kitchen table, pretending they were just a joke. When Emily came down, I said, "I read about these fun little genealogy things, like those shows on TV. Want to try for fun?" She tilted her head, curiosity lighting her eyes. "Really?" "Sure, why not?" I smiled, forcing a light tone. Who knows? Maybe we're related to the Queen of England. Emily laughed. A clear, young laugh, light as the wind. All right, I'll do it. She picked up the swab and followed the instructions carefully. I tried to stay calm, but as I watched her concentrate, I realized my hands were shaking. When we sealed the envelopes, I said, "All done. Easy, right?" "Yes," Emily said. "You'll do yours too?" I nodded and did the same. The two envelopes lay side by side, two puzzle pieces whose fit I could not yet imagine. When she went up to her room, I stayed, staring at them for a long time. The lamplight glinted off the slanted words printed on the boxes, and my chest tightened. Perhaps for the first time in 17 years, I was truly afraid, not of loss, but of hope. Because if the results were real, I'd have to face everything I had run from. The next day, I received a message from Marco. "Live music at my cafe tonight. You and Emily should come." I showed the phone to Emily. She smiled brightly. "It's been so long since I've heard live music." I looked at her eager expression, and something in me softened. Maybe it was the first time she'd been invited somewhere, not out of pity. That evening, we went together. The cafe glowed warm with light, filled with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon. Marco greeted us with his gentle smile. Emily listened to the music, her eyes shining, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. Watching her, I thought, if Henry were still alive, he would have said, "See, Harris, the world is still kind, after all." When we walked home, snow had started to fall again. The girl walked beside me in silence, leaving small footprints along the white road. I found myself wanting to take her hand, not to guide her, but to keep the warmth of something returning. Hope. That night, I opened my old journal and wrote one line. Sometimes, the past doesn't return to hurt us. It comes to remind us that we still know how to love. Then I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Laura Parker, if you can hear me, I won't let this girl lose her way again." I turned off the light and went to my room. In the darkness, the wind still blew outside. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because I knew, sometimes, the shadows of the past are the very paths that lead us back to the light. That morning, a thin snow was falling, tiny white flakes clinging to the shop window before melting slowly under the warmth inside. I was wiping dust off the counter when my phone vibrated. A small ding. On the screen appeared the words, "Your DNA results are ready." I froze. My fingers stopped midair. A drop of water fell from the cloth onto the wooden counter. 4 simple words, yet my heart pounded so hard I could hear every beat. I set the phone down, took a deep breath, and leaned on the counter. The room was suddenly too quiet. Only the soft ticking of the clock, the hiss of wind outside, and the faint smell of cooling coffee. I didn't open the results right away. I was afraid. Afraid that what I'd been sensing all this time was nothing more than the delusion of a lonely old woman. But also afraid that if it was true, then the last 17 years of my life had been spent living beside a hollow absence. That afternoon, Emily sat at the corner table writing intently. The late sunlight touched her soft brown hair, glinting with a golden hue. She tilted her head slightly, lips pressed together, her face calm and focused. I watched her, and a vague dread rose in me. I knew that, if the result matched, my life would never be the same. But if it didn't, I would lose her forever. That night, after Emily went upstairs, I sat before the computer. The pale blue light reflected on my face, a face lined with years, regret, and what-ifs. I clicked open the email. The page loaded, And there it was, the number, 999% match. I went still. No more wind, no more ticking clock, only that line of text, glowing like a blade cutting through the ice around my heart. A tear fell onto the keyboard, spreading into a small circle. Then another. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling a sob. 17 years. 17 years of guilt, of silence, of letters never sent. And now, that cold, saving number told me the truth. Emily was my granddaughter, my blood. The child that fate had carried back to me, a late miracle. I cried until the light dimmed, not from sadness, but from relief. It felt as though someone had finally unlatched the door of my heart after years of being locked. The next morning, I rose early. The sky was still gray. I opened Henry's old wooden cabinet, the one he'd built himself, and took out a small velvet box. Inside was our wedding ring. The metal had dulled with time, but its shine remained. Henry once told me, if one day you must trade something to keep what matters more, use this. It's only a thing. But love never disappears. I held the ring for a long time, then slipped it into my coat pocket. At noon, I brought it to the pawn shop on the corner. The owner looked surprised. Are you sure, ma'am? It's a beautiful ring. I smiled. I'm sure. It's about to help me keep something worth more than gold. With the money, I paid for Emily's GED classes and bought a fine writing set, ink pens, soft white paper, and a brown leather journal. I remembered her once saying, I don't know if I'm any good at it, but when I write, I don't feel lost. And I wanted her to always have a place to anchor that feeling. That afternoon, I set the DNA results envelope on the table beside the gift box of pens. When Emily came in, I called to her, Emily, come here. I have something to tell you. She approached, curiosity lighting her face. Remember that genealogy project from before? I smiled faintly. I just got the results. She laughed awkwardly. Let me guess. You're related to some famous writer or something? I didn't answer. I opened the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. No, Emily. The results say, you and I share the same blood. She froze. Her eyes widened. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. I handed her the paper. She read it, then looked up, her voice shaking. You? You're my grandmother? I nodded, tears running down my cheeks. Yes, you're my granddaughter, Emily, and I'll never let you be alone again. She threw her arms around me. The hug came suddenly, tight and trembling, as if she were afraid I might disappear. I held her close, feeling her small heartbeat against my chest. In that moment, I saw Henry, Ethan, and my younger self, all blending together in the warmth of a reunion heaven itself must have arranged. I whispered, You don't have to go anywhere now, Emily. Your home is here. She wept softly. Warm tears fell onto my shoulder, burning, alive. Thank you, Grandma, she murmured. From now on, I'll call you Grandma Harris. I laughed through my tears. I'd love that. That evening, we had our first dinner together as a family. I cooked pumpkin soup, Henry's favorite. Emily helped me set the table, clumsily spilling some salt, then blushing and laughing. That laughter filled the kitchen with life. For so long, I had thought this house was dead. Yet, it had only been waiting for that sound. When we finished cleaning up, she suddenly asked, her voice quiet, Grandma Harris, do you think my dad ever wanted to meet me? I froze. The ticking clock on the wall grew louder in the silence. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that once held Ethan's when he was a child and let go when he walked away. I don't know, I admitted softly. But I'll find out. I promise. She nodded, her lips trembling. I knew the question wasn't only for me. It was for the whole world that had made her endure so much silence. That night, I sat alone by the window. Outside, snow was falling again, flakes dissolving on the pavement like countless memories fading away. I thought of Henry, of the way his eyes shone when he first held Ethan. I remembered his words. No matter what happens, make sure our son knows he's loved. I whispered, Henry, I failed to keep that promise, but I won't make the same mistake again. I opened a drawer and took out the old notebook, the one where I had written letters to Ethan but never sent. I read the faded lines. My son, if one day you meet a little girl with eyes like yours, please open your arms to her. She's the part of you I lost. Tears fell again. I closed the notebook and looked toward the attic where Emily slept. Now, I had a chance to mend the past, and I knew that tomorrow I would try to call Ethan. No matter how my voice shook, no matter how afraid I was, I had to speak, not just for me, but for the girl upstairs, the one who had unknowingly stitched shut an old wound in my heart. When I turned off the light, the glow from the street seeped through the curtains, drawing faint stripes across the wall. I stared at them, feeling a rare peace settle inside me. For the first time in 17 years, I felt as if Henry were beside me, smiling gently, and I whispered, like a prayer, thank you for bringing her to me. And if Ethan still has a little love left, please help him find his way home. I hadn't slept for 3 nights. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face from 17 years ago. The cold stare he gave me the afternoon he walked out, his proud voice echoing in my head. I don't want to be buried with dead books. That sentence had haunted me all these years, looping endlessly like a curse. And now, as I was about to call him, my hands trembled. 17 years of silence cannot be undone by a single phone call. I looked out the window. The snow had stopped falling. A pale morning light covered the bare trees. Emily was outside arranging the display, softly whistling, her hair lifting in the breeze. The sight made me feel both warm and afraid. If Ethan learned the truth, would he have enough heart to see that girl as his daughter? Or would he wound her again, the way he once wounded us? I picked up the phone. Ethan's number was still etched in my memory, even though I'd once sworn never to dial it again. I pressed each number slowly, my fingers shaking, my heart pounding. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a man's voice, familiar and foreign at once, answered. Hello? I swallowed hard. Ethan? It's your mother. A silence, as long as a lifetime followed. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Mom? His voice low, hoarse, uncertain. Is something wrong? I took a deep breath. No, but there's something you need to hear. About Laura, and about Emily. He didn't respond for a long time. Then he said quietly, I'm not sure what you mean. Just come to Willow Street, tomorrow, 10 in the morning, if you still have any sense of responsibility left. Come. I hung up before he could answer. That night, I sat alone in the shop under the yellow glow of the lamps. The room was still, filled only with the ticking of the clock and the sound of my breath. I saw Henry in my mind, dusting the shelves, looking up with that soft smile of his. Harris, sometimes people only understand the value of something when they've almost lost it forever. I whispered, Henry, tomorrow, I'll have to do it. The next morning, the shop was cleaner than usual. Emily wore the sweater I'd mended for her and was wiping the shelves, smiling. "Grandma Harris, you look different today," she said. I exhaled softly. "We have an important visitor, dear." "A visitor? Who?" I hesitated. "Someone who used to belong here." She didn't ask more, just nodded and went back to work. Near 10 o'clock, I heard a car stop outside. I knew it was Ethan before I even saw him. The door opened, and he walked in. Time had changed him. Gray streaks touched his temples. His suit was elegant, his watch expensive. Everything about him reeked of success. But his eyes, those eyes, were still cold, proud, and they still hurt to look at. "Hello, Mom," he said softly, but without warmth. I nodded. "Thank you for coming." He looked around the shop, gave a dry chuckle. "Still the same. I thought this place would have closed by now." "Maybe because I wasn't ready to bury my memories," I replied evenly. The words made him pause. I gestured to the table. "Sit down. I have something for you to see." I placed the DNA envelope before him. He frowned. "What's this?" "The results. Emily Parker, my granddaughter, Laura's daughter." The name Laura froze him. Ethan swallowed, his eyes darkening. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," I said. "Laura had a child. She's your blood, Ethan." He stared at me, then sank into the chair, letting out a hollow laugh. "No, Laura never told me." "She did," I said firmly. "You just didn't listen. You said you weren't ready, remember?" His face went pale. "She was lying," he murmured weakly. "No, my son, not this time." I slid the paper toward him. He picked it up, eyes scanning the words. 99.9% match, his hand trembling. 17 years, I whispered. 17 years that girl lived without knowing who she was, and I lived without a soul. Both of us paid for your silence. Ethan stood, turning away, his shoulders rigid. "I just wasn't ready," he said, as if trying to convince himself. I stared at his back, feeling my heart crack. 17 years not ready, Ethan? My voice broke. You threw away two women who loved you most. You didn't just lose a wife, you lost the chance to be a father. He turned, his eyes red. You don't understand. Oh, I do. I cut him off. I understand fear, but fear is no excuse for abandonment. At that moment, a small sound came from behind the wooden door. A faint clack, something falling to the floor. I turned, and my heart seized. Emily stood there, behind the storage door, a hand over her mouth. A notebook lay at her feet, shattering the silence. She had heard everything. I saw the look in her eyes, shattered glass. She stumbled back, bumping into the shelf. Books tumbled down with soft thuds. Ethan flinched, but I was already moving. Emily, I called, my voice trembling. She turned away, tears spilling. He's my father? I couldn't answer. I just placed a hand on her shoulder. Ethan stood frozen, his lips moving but no words coming out. Emily gave a broken laugh through her tears. I understand now. He doesn't want me, just like he didn't want my mom. Then she turned and walked out, the door slamming behind her. The wind rushed in, cold, merciless. I faced Ethan again, my voice shaking but steady. Do you see, Ethan? That's the price of waiting too long. You've made another child learn strength the hard way. He lowered his head, silent, fists clenched. I closed my eyes, exhaled. You can walk away if you want, but remember, some wounds can't be healed with money, only with time and truth. He didn't answer. He walked to the door, paused for a moment. His voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry." "Don't tell me," I said quietly. "Tell her." Then he left, his figure dissolving into the falling snow. I sank into a chair, every bone aching with exhaustion. The gray daylight filtered through the window, shining on the scattered books, witnesses to the closing of a chapter. I wiped my tears with the corner of my scarf and looked upward. "Henry," I murmured. "I did what had to be done. So why does my heart still feel so heavy?" Outside, Emily sat on the steps, her shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. I went out and draped a shawl around her. "You can hate him if you need to," I said softly. "But don't let anger define you. I made that mistake with Ethan, and I won't let you repeat it." She looked up, tears glistening on her lashes, her voice trembling. "Grandma Harris, I don't hate him. I just feel empty." I pulled her close. "That emptiness will be filled again, sweetheart. You have me, and you have yourself." We sat there for a long time, wrapped in the gentle cold of the afternoon. I knew that, painful as it was, this confrontation had been necessary. Because sometimes, to open one door, you must have the courage to close another. After that confrontation, the house grew so quiet. I could hear the wind breathing through the cracks in the doors. Ethan had left. Emily withdrew into herself, spoke less, her eyes still as a lake after a storm. In those days, I realized there are many kinds of silence, some born of peace and some born of pain that hasn't yet found its name. I don't blame my son. Though my heart still aches, I know Ethan is the result of fear, just like I was many years ago. But Emily is different. She doesn't deserve to carry adults' pain on her shoulders. I made myself a promise. Even if I have to rise out of ashes, I will give that girl back the smile she lost. In the first days of January, the snow melted slowly, revealing earth speckled with mud. Willow Street seemed to wake from a long sleep. I decided to do something for Emily, and for myself. That day, when she sat quietly by the counter, eyes drifting toward the window, I went over and said softly, "Emily, I have an idea. How about we start a teen reading club?" She blinked, a little surprised. "A reading club?" "Yes. For kids who felt lost. Kids like you and like me." She gave a faint smile. "I'm afraid no one will come, Grandma Harris." "Then we'll read together first. Just the two of us. That's a club already." I saw the corner of her mouth lift, just a little. But I knew the first seed had sprouted. In the weeks that followed, we began to put the shop in order. I repainted the old shelves. And Emily decorated with children's drawings she got from the nearby church. I bought some dried flowers to hang on the door, and she made a small sign to place outside. The Willow Street Reading Club, where small souls find their voices again. On opening day, only 4 children came. 2 girls from a foster home, a quiet boy, and a curly-haired chatterbox who asked about everything. I made cocoa, and Emily read aloud from Anne of Green Gables. Her voice trembled at first, then grew steady, warm and rhythmic. The kids listened, then laughed, then asked questions, then clamored to read. I sat in a corner, silent, watching that scene, something I hadn't seen since Henry died. Laughter, the sound of pages turning, the smell of chocolate mingling with old paper. I thought, perhaps this is how a soul is healed, not by forgetting, but by teaching others to believe in the good. Marco started stopping by more often. He brought coffee, pastries, and laughter. He helped me fix the rickety tables and hung little string lights around the shelves. "Looks like a mini cafe," he said with a soft smile. "We're selling hope, Marco," I replied. "And hope needs a bright place." He looked at me, his gaze gentle, warming. Then he leaned in and murmured, "You know, Harris, I've never seen anyone love a place like you do. Willow Street survives because of your heart." I smiled, but inside, I knew the truth. It wasn't me. It was Emily. She had done what I couldn't, opened the door again. One afternoon, with sunlight slanting through the window, I saw Emily sitting among the children, telling them about old books. Her voice was clear. Her hands traced little shapes in the air. Her eyes shone. She said, "When I read a book, I feel like I'm talking to a friend who knows how to keep secrets. Whether I'm sad or happy, they're always there." The children listened, spellbound. I stood at a distance, tears rising without knowing why. Maybe because I realized I had once been as lonely as she was, but now she was teaching me how to love the world again. I whispered, "I tried to save this shop, but in the end, it's Emily who saved me." That evening, as we closed up, Emily sat by the window, cradling a cup of tea, watching the sparse snow fall. She said softly, "Grandma Harris, today was wonderful. The kids are so sweet." I smiled and sat beside her. "I think you were wonderful. If Grandpa Henry were alive, he'd be so proud." She was quiet for a while, then gently leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know, when I was little, I always wished for someone to listen to my stories. Now, I have someone." I took her hand. The hand that had once been calloused was now softer, warmer, like a flower blooming in winter. And I wished for someone to listen to. "You've given me that." We sat together without another word. Only the wind, the distant laughter from the next street over, and the clock in the shop ticking slowly. Tick, tock, tick, tock, like the heartbeat of a house newly revived. One morning, Marco brought a basket of apples. "For the club," he said. "I want to join too." I laughed. "What will you read?" "Maybe The Little Prince or To Kill a Mockingbird. But I promise I won't make the kids cry." Emily cheered. "No one cries when Uncle Marco reads." From that day on, Marco became our third storyteller. He read. Emily and I listened. The shop brimmed with light and the smell of coffee. The children called him Uncle Coffee, and they called me Grandma Harris Books. As for Emily, they gave her a special name, Our Old Books. The first time I heard it, I was taken aback. But Emily just smiled, her eyes soft. "They say it because I talk about you a lot." I squeezed her hand. "That's a lovely name, Emily." Months passed. A shop that had once held only dust and memories now overflowed with laughter and the smell of baked goods. The wall behind the counter filled with children's drawings. Rainbows, books, a willow tree, and even a picture of two women smiling and holding hands. I asked who drew it. Emily answered, eyes bright. "They said it's Grandma and me." I stood still, my hands trembling. In that moment, I saw Henry, little Ethan, even Laura Parker. Everyone seemed to be smiling inside those innocent drawings. On the last cold night of March, I brought a blanket to drape over Emily's shoulders as she dozed at her study table. On the table lay the poems she'd been writing. I read the opening lines softly. "There are cracks across the mirror, yet light still finds a way through. There are hearts that once were broken, and still they know to love anew." I smiled and set my hand on her shoulder. "My child," I whispered, "you're mending the world with the small things you do." The lamp cast a gentle glow on her face, serene as the first snow of the season. Outside, the wind moved through the old willow branches, carrying the scent of books, of coffee, and of hope. I closed my eyes and saw Henry smiling, somewhere in a dream, saying softly, "See, Harris? Every winter thaws." I laughed quietly, tears pricking my eyes. "Yes, Henry," I whispered. And this time, the light truly has found its way home. May arrived like a warm breath of wind. The snow was gone and sunlight spilled gold over Willow Street. My bookstore, once a refuge for loneliness, now buzzed with voices and laughter. The scratch of pens, the rustle of turning pages, the soft creak of the door opening and closing. And above it all, Emily's laughter. She was no longer the thin, lost girl I'd met that winter. She glowed in her own way, gentle, bright, and full of life. These days, I often sat behind the counter with a cup of tea, watching her talk to customers, and felt a quiet, swelling pride. Emily had finished her GED exams. She scored nearly perfect. The morning she got her results, she ran back to the store, waving the paper, her face radiant. "Grandma Harris, I did it!" I couldn't help but open my arms. "Of course you did." My voice trembled. In her smile, I saw Henry. I saw myself from long ago, when I still believed that with enough effort, every wound could heal. After the exam, Emily began to write more. In the mornings, she tended the shop. In the afternoons, she sat by the window, writing endlessly. Pages filled with words, lines of poetry carrying the breath of youth and hope. She titled her first manuscript, "The Light Between Pages." One evening, I asked, "Why that title?" She smiled, her eyes tender. "Because I think there's still light between old pages, even just a little. Like you and me, two people who weren't supposed to meet, but somehow found each other." I took her hand and whispered, "And that light saved us both." Thanks to Emily's energy, the shop transformed in ways that astonished me. She created a social media page for Willow Street Books. At first, I worried. I'd always feared technology. But she explained patiently, "It's okay, Grandma. Social media is just another way to tell a story." Within weeks, her photos, our cozy reading nook, steaming cups of coffee, handwritten poems began spreading everywhere. People called it the coziest bookstore in town. Some even drove in from other cities just to see the place where the story of kindness began. Sales rose, but what mattered more were the faces, smiling, soft, alive when people left. Someone said once, "This place doesn't just have books, it has the feeling of being welcomed." Every time I heard that, I looked at Emily and thought, yes, she's turned this place into a home. She herself changed too. I saw confidence in her step, in the way she spoke, in the ease of her laughter. Marco, who still helped us often, noticed as well. One afternoon, he dropped a pastry on the counter and said, "This girl's going to surpass us all, Harris." I laughed. "I hope so," he teased. "If you ever open a class on how to teach hope, I'll be your first student." I smiled back. "Then make sure you bring the coffee." The three of us, me, Emily, and Marco, became a strange little family. None of us perfect, but somehow we had mended one another. In summer, the store hosted Emily's first poetry reading. She wore a white dress, stood beneath a circle of warm lights, hands trembling around her poems. I watched from the back, my heart pounding as if it were me up there. She began to read, slow and steady, her voice deep and warm. I once feared the winter, but then I met someone who loved the snow. She taught me that even when the world is cold, You can still light a fire." The audience applauded. I pressed a hand to my mouth to hold back a sob. For the first time, I saw a soul healed by its own words. From that day on, Emily became a familiar face in our small community. She taught writing to children, helping them find ways to tell their own stories. I watched quietly, seeing in her eyes what Henry once called the light of someone who has learned to love again. Then, one August morning, while I was cleaning the counter, Emily rushed in, pale-faced. I thought something was wrong, but she only handed me her phone, her voice shaking. "Grandma Harris, there's an email from my dad." I froze. The message was short. From Ethan, Destiny subject. I was wrong. I'd like to see you, if you'd let me. I laid a hand on her shoulder. "Do you want to see him?" She was silent. Her eyes flickered between fear and longing. "I don't know. Part of me wants to, part of me doesn't." I understood. I'd felt the same way years ago, waiting for Ethan to come home. "It's all right," I said. "You don't have to decide yet. Just listen to your heart." She nodded, tears glimmering. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if he hurts me again?" I squeezed her hand. "And if you never see him, that question will hurt you for the rest of your life. Both paths are painful, just in different ways." She bowed her head. "I need time." I smiled, though a strange fear rose in me. I knew Ethan, the way he could wrap people in beautiful promises that turned hollow. I prayed that if he returned, this time, it would be with a real heart. That night, I wrote my first diary entry in years. "She's growing up, Henry. She carries the light I once lost." But today, when I saw Ethan's name in her inbox, I felt afraid. I'm afraid someone might snuff out that light again. I closed the journal and looked out the window. The streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, golden and soft. Through the window, I saw Emily's silhouette, sitting at her desk, staring at her screen, her fingers trembling over the keys. I wanted to say something, but stopped. She needed to face this herself. And I had to learn to trust the next generation, to believe she could do what I once couldn't, face the truth without letting it break her. The next day, the store opened as usual. Customers came, Marco brewed coffee, and the jazz music hummed gently in the air. But inside me, something had shifted, like still water waiting for wind. I watched Emily laugh. With a customer, her eyes bright. And yet, beneath that brightness, I saw something only the weathered can recognize. Fear, hiding beneath the light. I whispered to myself, "You have your father's strength, child. But you love without conditions. That's what makes you different." I held my teacup tighter. In the corner of the shop, I imagined Henry's gentle figure, smiling as always. "Don't be afraid, Harris," I could almost hear him say. "Every story needs a trial before it finds its joy." I nodded and looked toward the window. Outside, sunlight poured over the old sign, Willow Street Books. Inside, the warm light spread across the shelves, over Emily's hair, and onto the face of a woman who had finally learned how to love life again. I used to believe that some doors, once closed, were better left that way. But life doesn't run according to our wishes. It has a strange habit of testing us, just when we think we've finally found peace. That morning, as I was wiping dust from the old bookcase, the bell over the door rang. I looked up, and my heart sank. Ethan, my son, whom I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades, was standing there. Gray suit, polished black shoes, a bouquet of white roses in his hand. the scent of expensive cologne mixed with the lingering smell of snow in his hair. "Hello, Mom," Ethan said, his voice low, unexpectedly gentle. "I think it's time I apologized." I looked at the bouquet in his hand. Perfect! Not a single petal bruised. Too perfect. "I don't need flowers," I said. "You came because of Emily?" Ethan nodded, his smile soft as silk. "I want to see her. Just to talk." I held his gaze. "All right, but I'll ask her first." For a flicker of a moment, I saw impatience in my son's eyes, the look of someone more used to controlling than understanding. That afternoon, I told Emily. She was shelving books. Her hands froze midair. "Do you think I should see him?" "It's up to you," I said. "If you don't, you'll carry that question for the rest of your life. But if you do, there may be another wound. Both paths hurt, just in different ways." She looked out the window, where sunlight fell through the frosted glass. "I want to try, even if it's just once." The next morning, Ethan came. The door opened, and Emily stood there. Still the girl I'd rescued from winter winds. But now she stood straight, her gaze steady, her voice soft. "Hello, Dad?" Ethan smiled, opening his arms. "You've grown so much." Emily stepped back slightly, then dipped her head. "Thank you." They sat. I stood behind the counter, watching. Ethan began to talk about the past, about his fears, about how foolish he'd been. Every word arranged perfectly, just sincere enough to soften the listener, just controlled enough to reveal no weakness. I looked at Emily. She listened, fingers laced together, her eyes both curious and distant. I knew she was trying to believe, and yet something inside her was unsettled. I recognized that feeling, because I carried it too. "I can help Emily with many things," Ethan said, smiling with confidence. "I have a company in Seattle, a young creative team. The girl has a talent for writing. She just needs the right guidance." "I like writing small things," Emily replied. "Simple stories that remind people the world is still good." Ethan frowned, his tone soft but hard beneath it. "Small things don't feed anyone, dear." That sentence cut through memory like a small knife. The day Ethan left home, he'd said almost the same to me. "Your books are scraps from a bygone age." Hearing it again now, I recognized the same timbre. Calm, but cruel. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began to drop by often. He brought gifts, a coat, a watch, even a new laptop. Each time he handed one over, he said, "Just to make studying and writing easier." Emily accepted them, but I saw confusion in her eyes. One evening as we made tea, she said to me, "Grandma Harris, I don't know whether to be moved or afraid. These gifts feel like promises no one says out loud." "True kindness never needs a receipt," I replied. "If someone makes you feel indebted, that isn't love." One afternoon, Ethan arrived with a thick folder, a company logo stamped on the cover. "I have one last gift," he said, placing it on the table. "A trust fund for Emily's literary future. I'll invest, guarantee income. You only need to write." I pulled out a sheet, my eyes skimming the tiny print. A contract in disguise. Vague clauses, creative control, a modifiable profit split. "How generous," I said, my voice dry. "But Emily will have a lawyer review it." Ethan gave a light laugh. "You don't trust me, Mother?" "I trust your mind. I'm not sure you still have a heart." After he left, Emily carried the folder upstairs. That night, I heard her pacing on the wooden floor, then the whisper of pages. I went up and knocked. She was sitting amid a sea of paper, eyes red. "He says, if I sign, I'll be free." But why do I feel like I'm about to lose my freedom? I sat beside her, pointing line by line. Here's editorial control. Here's undetermined revenue. You don't need anyone else holding the keys to your life. She gave a sad little smile. Grandma, I think this is worth turning into a story. So long as, in the story, the main character knows how not to sign. The next morning, Ethan returned. Emily set the folder on the table. I've read it carefully, she said, her voice gentle but firm. If it's my fund, then the name needs to be mine. I want to manage myself. Ethan paused, then forced a smile. You truly have destiny blood. No, Emily answered, meeting his eyes. I have my mother's blood. His smile vanished. He nodded, muttered a few vague words, and left. When the door closed, Emily leaned against the shelf, exhaling. You did the right thing, I said, laying a hand on her shoulder. No one has the right to make you feel grateful for living your own life. But Ethan didn't let go. He came back again, acting humbler, bringing coffee, asking about Henry, even helping with the dusting. One morning, he stood at the window, watching the scant snow. You know, sometimes I miss the smell of wood here. Missing isn't loving, son, and loving isn't staying. When I told Marco, he only shook his head. People who truly repent say less. People who want their power back speak with a practiced voice. I smiled faintly. Perhaps I need to practice testing people's hearts, Marco. One noon, Ethan took Emily to lunch. When she returned, she was silent, then said, he apologized, said he wants to take me to Seattle, teach me how to operate in the real world. I don't know whether to be happy or sad. I asked, do you want to go? I want to write, here, with the children, with you. I nodded. The real world is wherever we dare to choose happiness, Emily. No one needs to teach you that. That evening, Ethan brought a cake. On top it read, Chukmung Emily, misspelled. He didn't notice. But I understood. People only misspell the names of those they haven't truly seen. At night, I sat alone at the counter. The night wind slipped through the cracks, carrying the scent of first snow. I opened a drawer, took out Henry's fountain pen, and the offer to buy the shop from 17 years ago. The paper was old, the print faded, but I still remembered the feeling of holding it, the first time I knew what it meant to lose my soul. I wrote softly in a small notebook, if you need a play to reveal the truth, stage it on the theater of kindness. There, those who are true will shine, and those who are false will fade. When I turned off the lights, I looked out the window. The Willow Street book sign glowed a gentle gold. Upstairs, Emily's pen moved steadily, light as a heartbeat. I spoke to Henry in the dark. This time, I won't be silent. If I have to rekindle the fire to illuminate the true face of the past, I will. And I knew the next gust of wind would bring a test. But it might also bring the chance to end, once and for all, what has been left unsaid. There are nights when I lie awake, listening to the wind slip through the cracks in the door, and think of Henry, the man who once said, sometimes love needs strategy. I never believed him, not until Ethan came back. Lately, Ethan had been showing up more often, immaculate, polished, and terrifyingly composed. He brought coffee, chatted with customers, praised Emily like a proud father. The entire neighborhood thought he had changed. Only I knew. The eyes, the smile, the gestures were all calculated, as precise as numbers in a balance sheet. And I decided the play had gone on long enough. It was time to end it. I began setting a small trap, not for revenge, but for a release. One evening, When Ethan stopped by the shop, I invited him to stay for tea. You know, I began softly, this old woman can't keep the store forever. Someone offered to buy it for $1 million. What do you think? Ethan looked up, and there it was, the spark in his eyes I'd been waiting for. $1 million? Yes, I nodded. But there's one condition. If you truly want to help me and Emily, I'll sell it to you. For that exact price. I want the store to stay in the family. But you must promise. Cut ties with Emily forever. She needs her freedom to write without being bound by old mistakes. He was silent for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Are you serious? I am, I said evenly. I've got the papers ready. Without hesitation, Ethan said, I agree. Emily will be fine. She's strong. I looked at my son, my flesh and blood, and in that moment, my heart clenched as if someone had taken it in their fist. I realized I'd won. But victory had never tasted so bitter. I didn't know Emily had been standing behind the door, not until I heard paper drop and saw her shoulders tremble. Then came the small sound of books falling to the floor. Ethan turned sharply. Emily? She stood there, not angry, not crying, just awake. Her voice was quiet and level. You were willing to sell me out for money? That's not what I... Ethan stammered, but his words broke apart like ash in the wind. Emily drew a deep breath. No need to explain. And Grandma Harris, don't say anything either. Then she turned to me and smiled, a small, piercing smile. I get it now. The trap wasn't for me. It was for him. I froze. She had understood me completely, and she wasn't angry. Only trust can read another's silence. Ethan began to panic. Emily, I'm sorry. I just thought... You thought money could replace love. Emily interrupted. You never understood. My mother waited for a phone call, for a hug. She didn't need money. She needed you. And me, I did too. But not anymore. She stepped forward and placed a set of keys, the ones Ethan had given her for her birthday days earlier, on the table. These are for the Seattle apartment, right? You called them the keys to the future? Well, my future isn't there. She lifted her head, her eyes blazing like winter fire. I already have the keys. Here. She pointed toward the store, the golden lights spilling across the shelves, the teacups, and the laughter of children blending into a melody. Ethan bowed his head. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply stood there for a moment, then turned and walked out, his figure dissolving into the snow beyond the door. The door closed, and for several seconds, only one sound remained, the breathing of two women standing between rows of books. I stepped forward and held Emily tight. She didn't cry, but I felt the faint tremor of her shoulders beneath my hands. I didn't mean for you to hear, I whispered. It's all right, she murmured. I needed to, because sometimes, to protect the ones we love, we have to burn what's left of a half-broken bridge. I held her tighter, tears spilling freely now. In that embrace, I felt my heart, no longer aching, just light, as if a stone had finally fallen away after 17 years. The next morning, the store opened as usual, but something had changed. The air was clearer, the light warmer, the coffee somehow sweeter. Marco came in, setting a tray of pastries on the counter. I heard there was a little storm here yesterday. I laughed, wiping away a leftover tear. Just old wind, Marco. The wind passes, but the house remains. He glanced around, seeing Emily rearranging the shelves, her face serene. She's all right? Better than all right, I said. She's grown up. I watched as Emily bent to pick up an old bookmark, one that read, "To my daughter, when you're ready to read again." Perhaps Ethan had left it behind. Emily looked at it for a long time, then placed it on the shelf labeled "Books That Have Been Touched." "Sometimes," she said, "letting go is just another way of rereading the past." I nodded. "And one chapter closes, so another can begin." That night, I sat alone by the window and wrote in Henry's old notebook. I saw fear in my son's eyes, the fear of losing control, the fear of being forgotten. But I also saw strength in my granddaughters, the strength of faith, reborn. Perhaps the greatest victory isn't to make someone kneel, but to make them see themselves. I put down my pen and breathed deeply. Outside, snow fell softly, covering the eaves and the old Willow Street Books sign. Behind me, Emily was still awake. Her voice drifted gently through the quiet. "Grandma Harris." I finished the ending for my new story. I called it The Key of Light. I turned and smiled. "It's a good title. You don't need anyone to open doors for you anymore. You've learned how to find the lock yourself." She smiled back, her eyes warm and steady as a young sun. In that moment, I knew. I hadn't just saved Emily from tragedy. I had saved myself from the darkness of 17 years. That night, before turning out the light, I whispered, "Henry, do you see? The trap I set wasn't meant to hurt anyone. It was a trap of faith, where the false are caught and the true are freed." The wind outside rustled through the willow branches. I smiled softly. A chapter had ended. But this time, there was no pain left, only light. Small, gentle, but enough to guide two souls home through the longest night of winter. A year had passed since the night when snow covered the window panes in white. Willow Street still sat quietly on its little road. But everything had changed. It was no longer a shelter for loneliness, but a home for souls learning how to begin again. Each morning, I opened the door, the bell chiming like a greeting from the past. Light spilled in, washing over the old wooden shelves, mingling the scent of coffee, paper, and pine. I had always believed there was something sacred about the smell of books, the scent of memory, of knowledge, of lives once read and loved. Now, Willow Street Books was no longer my shop. It belonged to us, to me, to Emily, to Marco, to the children of the reading club, and to everyone who had ever walked through its doors with a heavy heart and left feeling lighter. Today was special. On the center shelf, the first printed copies of The Light Between Pages gleamed under the golden lights. The cover showed a door opening into a bright sky. An image, Emily said, represented the moment she found the light between pages. She was no longer the little girl she once was. Emily Parker, 18 years old, young author, founder of the Community Reading Club. Her eyes were full of confidence, her smile carrying a warmth that made everyone nearby feel safe. When I watched her standing among the crowd, signing books for her first readers, I had to grip my hands to keep from crying. On the dedication page, she had written, "To Harris, who gave me home, hope, and stories." I read that line again and again, feeling as if Henry were standing behind me, smiling, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. If he were alive, he would have said, "See, Harris? Every seed of kindness you plant will bloom someday." The book launch took place right inside the shop. Small, cozy, glowing with candlelight and laughter. Marco brought wine and apple pie, saying, "A good story deserves a sweet flavor." The children ran around hanging handmade banners. "Congratulations, Emily Parker." I sat behind the counter, watching it all like a dream woven into life. Some dreams don't need grandeur. Peace like this is enough. Marco came beside me and murmured, "You know, the store has changed a lot, but you're the one who kept it alive." I smiled, my voice trembling. "No, Marco." Emily brought the warmth back. I only lit the first spark. He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "No one can light a fire like someone who's known the cold." I stayed silent. Perhaps he was right. Maybe pain itself is the thread that makes kindness strong. That afternoon, when the crowd had thinned, Emily brought me a newspaper. "Grandma Harris, they wrote about our store." The headline read, "Willow Street Books, where the pages are written with kindness." The article told of a once orphaned girl who had slept in a bookstore attic and became a writer spreading hope. But the last line made my throat tighten. "And behind that light stands a woman who chose to stay." I set the paper down and smiled. "See, Emily, they called me the one who stayed." She took my hand, smiling through tears. "Because you never gave up, no matter how cold the world got." December came, and snow began to fall again. I had never loved winter the way I did that year. Marco rebuilt the fireplace. Emily taught the children to make Christmas cards. Laughter, the shuffle of paper, and the whistling wind outside blended into a familiar song. In one corner, I hung a new photo, Emily and me, taken in front of the shop on her launch day. On the back, I wrote, "Family isn't where we're born, it's where we choose to stay." Sometimes, I still thought of Ethan. He never returned, but months ago, I'd received a short letter. No apology, no explanation, just one line. "I'm reading Emily's book. Thank you, Mom, for raising what I couldn't." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside Henry's fountain pen. Forgiveness doesn't need words. It lives in the moment you stop hurting when you hear someone's name. On Christmas Eve, the shop stayed open. Outside, the snow was thick. Inside, the fireplace glowed red. Marco played guitar, the children sang Silent Night, and Emily laughed until her eyes sparkled. When the clock struck 8, she sat beside me, holding a steaming cup of tea. "Grandma Harris," she said softly, "I used to think happiness was a luxury, for the lucky ones. But now I think happiness is simply sitting beside someone you love, feeling safe." I looked at her, my heart brimming. "You know, Henry once told me that people only love truly once, but I don't believe that anymore, because I've loved again, in the light you brought me." Emily smiled, eyes shining. "Grandma," she whispered, "I never thought I'd have a home, but now I have a library." I laughed through tears. "And I never thought I'd have a second chapter. But you wrote it for me, dear, and it's even more beautiful than the first." We sat in silence. Outside, snow fell. Inside, the golden light wrapped around 2 generations. 2 souls once broken, now writing a new chapter together. After everyone had left, I stood alone by the window. The streets were white and the lamplight shimmered like a fallen galaxy. I poured another cup of tea and wrote the final lines in my old journal. Today, I saw Henry in Emily's smile. I heard my own voice in her words. Perhaps that is what rebirth truly is, when one heart finds its voice inside another. I put the pen down and gently closed the journal. Outside, the wind blew. The chimes rang softly. I smiled, watching the sign of Willow Street Books glow in the night. Family isn't who we're born with. It's who we choose to love and stay with. And I knew my story, Emily's story, Henry's story, the story of everyone who had ever been lost, had been rewritten in ink that, would never fade. Faith and kindness. Somewhere beyond the falling snow, I could almost hear Henry whisper, "Sleep, Harris. You've finished your story." I nodded gently. The shop lights glowed warm against the winter dark. A chapter had closed, but instead of a period, I left a comma. Because stories of kindness, hope, and family never truly end. Life is a strange thing. It makes us carry a hatred deep enough to want to burn everything down, then gives us a reason to love again, right at the place where the wound once was. Harris did not win through revenge. She won through kindness. Emily did not save herself through anger. She saved herself through faith. And Ethan, though he lost everything, was forced to face himself. That was the truest punishment of all. In the end, what they rewrote was not a story of vengeance, but an epic of forgiveness. Because sometimes the gentlest revenge is simply to live better than those who once hurt you. If you've ever been betrayed, ever lost something, ever had an Ethan in your own life, leave a comment. Would you choose hatred or forgiveness? Because maybe, just maybe, the choice you make today will become the first chapter in someone else's story of healing.